Okay, perfect. So the first question is, has the overall need for international mobility at your company increased, decreased, or remained the same in the past year? Please take a second and respond for what you've seen in your organization. Okay, so about 75% of you said it has increased, and 25% have said it remained the same. Ironically, nobody said a decrease in global mobility movement. Oh, it's even more now at this point. 91% increased, 8%, approximately remained the same. Could we switch over to the slide, please? So the result of, just give us 1 second. Yeah, so the result of the Inc. study showed that 48% of corporations saw an increase, whereas 12% saw a decrease, and 40% remained the same. So obviously there is a much larger need for immigration for the corporations that are represented in this room. The second slide, I'm not going to use Slido on this particular slide, but this question was, what are global mobility's top priorities for the upcoming year? And as you can see, there are a lot of different options. I'll just read through a few of them because there's too many to say them all. So the one that had the biggest response was at the bottom, simplifying administration and streamlining operations. That's where most organizations that were surveyed were focusing their efforts. The second one was improving the employee experience. And I think that everybody in this room would agree that that's a really important factor that's oftentimes overlooked. We send our foreign nationals on assignments to foreign countries without always giving them the proper training on what's happening in that culture, how to interact from a business perspective. And that actually tends to be the number one reason for a failure of an assignment. So it is important that we're giving our people, our foreign nationals, some training in how to do business in that foreign country. And then the third one is aligning mobility program with the talent strategy. There are a number of other options that are up there, reducing cost, technology solutions, but those kind of fell a little further down. Could we bring Slido up for the next one, please? Oh. So the next question, as it's coming up, I'll just read it out loud. Are you doing any of the following to improve the employee experience during an international assignment or transfer? And you have several different options here. The first one, streamlining the employee's point of contact or providing a single point of contact, automating assignment or transfer workflow, allowing employees to self-serve aspects of the assignments, tracking goals over the course of the assignment, providing assignment or transfer goals. If you could please just take a moment and tell us what you're most focused on. And then we can compare that to the results of the survey. So right now it's looking like streamlining the employee's point of contact is the number one goal for the people within this room. I'll give it just a couple more seconds to see if that shifts at all. And then number two, it looks like automating assignment or transfer workflow. Okay, if we could switch over to the slide. So the results of the survey were consistent with what you just said. So streamlining the employee's point of contact resonated with 61% of the survey respondents. The second one was offering policies that allow employees some choice of benefits. That differed a little bit from what was important to the folks in this room. Okay, last Slido question, if we could go back, is what do you use to measure an employee's success in an assignment? Do you have an assignee satisfaction survey during the assignment? Do you have one after the assignment? Do you do a job performance rating during the assignment or after the assignment? job promotions either during or after? What are you doing within your organizations? Or are you doing nothing at all? And that's certainly a possibility. So it looks like we have almost a tie for the first two. Assignee satisfaction survey during the assignment and after the assignment tend to be most leveraged within this group. Okay, that's based off of about 50 respondents. I think that's good. Let's switch back to the slide, please. So ironically, for the corporations that were surveyed, 57% said that they don't do anything. And I read a statistic once that said after a person is repatriated back home from an assignment, they typically only stay with the organization for up to 18 months. And then they quit and they go to a competing company. So it is important that you're leveraging the knowledge and exploring how you can use that experience, that international experience, to benefit your own company. Okay, I would like to transition into some of the training, and I'm going to start off with China. Let me take care of the slide. All right. So China has ambitious economic plans, an aging workforce, and a shortage of talent. So the government has put in place a number of immigration rules and policies to encourage foreigners to work, live, and stay in the country. In 2008, they overhauled their program, putting in place more streamlined procedures, more oversight and power at the national rather than local city level, and greater oversight of foreign nationals from a security perspective. China has nearly 1 million foreigners working in the country, but most recently, as of August 1st, new immigration rules went into effect to encourage foreign workers and top students to attain residence or remain in China longer. They increased the number of permanent residence permits to qualified overseas workers, and they added more long-term visas to top talents. So China has several different visa types available. The M visa is their business visa. The Z visa is the foreign employee visa, so that's your work permit holder. That would be applying for a Z visa. And then the L visa is your tourist visa. Now for the M visa, I just want to focus on that one. You can perform work activities for up to 90 days as long as no salary is paid from within China. Depending on the consular post, it is issued as either a single or a multiple entry for a duration of either 30, 60, or 90 days. Now, the M visa does allow for technical training, systems installation, training, and auditing. If you do send somebody on an M visa, they still need to get their temporary residence registration, and it needs to be completed within 24 hours of arriving in the country. Typically, if your candidate is staying in a hotel, they can simply get it taken care of at the hotel. Otherwise, they would need to go to the police station to have that residence tracked. As many of you may know, China's cities are classified into a tier system. The 4 tiers are segmented by GDP. So tier 1 cities include, for instance, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. These are the largest cities in terms of population and GDP. What makes China immigration more tedious is that each city can have different rules, timelines, and processes for immigration. So it's important to check on this before sending your foreign nationals there, because every city does have their own, fingerprints on what that process is. In the past, there were 2 work permits available in China, but it used to be the employment permit and the expert permit. But those 2 don't exist anymore, and they've combined them to become a sole and unique foreigner's work permit. The following key changes were implemented as part of this foreigner's work permit. They now have an online application system to complete the relevant applications and upload the supporting documents. They provide a unique identification number to every foreign employee, and they classify employees into 3 different categories, A, B, and C, which I'll get to in just a second. So foreign nationals are, oh, I'm sorry, that's hard to read. Foreign nationals are now classified into one of 3 categories under a points-based system. And it's based on a number of different factors. For instance, they take into account your educational level, your work experience, your salary, your Mandarin proficiency, if any, and then your working location. So type A, which it says in that top box, high-end personnel, achievement in academia, business, entertainment, and typically would hold a position of authority. So type A is for your very highly educated, unique individual, somebody who's at the top of his or her field. So these are recipients of international awards. They're selected by China's Talent Important Plan. They're entrepreneurs. Type A permits people that qualify for a type A permit must achieve 85 points on the point system, and those are typically given to only 16% of the foreign nationals that go to China. The benefit of being a type A candidate is that the immigration rules are a bit more lenient. Under that category, there's no quota as to how many people can come in, as a type A candidate. And it's a faster approval process. But only 16% of the people can actually leverage that, or about 16%. What we see more people going through, probably what you would experience for the types of foreign nationals that are IT folks or engineers, would be the type B. These are individuals that are scoring at least 60 points in the system, and these are management, technical, or research positions. So it's perfect for your engineers, your IT workers. They must hold a bachelor's degree, and they would have to have at least 2 years of relevant experience in the field. That goes to about 61% of the foreign nationals that are going to China. The third one is type C, which is given to about 22% of the candidates. This is really more of like the seasonal worker. It's only granted for a maximum of 90 days, and the types of workers that tend to be lower skilled, lower educated. So perhaps domestic workers or even interns, just people that are going to be going in and out of China for a shorter period of time. That goes to 22% of the candidates. Obviously, as you slide lower into the categories, it's harder to get those types of permits, and it takes longer. So from a process standpoint, the first step when you're applying for a work permit to China is to apply for a foreigner's work permit notice. That can be done from here, from wherever your home location is. This generally is online application. It takes about 10 working days for you to get, for it to be adjudicated, unless the government asks for some additional documents. At that point, you need to submit the supporting documents that go along with the application. And then once you get that initial approval, you have 3 months to apply for your Z visa, which leads us to the next step. You're going to be applying for your entry visa from your country of residence. If you're intending to work and only work, you're going to apply for your Z visa. In some cases, if you want to go initially on a business visa, Shanghai does allow for you to come in on an M visa and then follow your work permit stream from within the country. Not every city does that. Shanghai is just an example of one that does. You then would need to do your medical exam. That's typically done pretty much as soon as you get to China, but As I've said a little bit earlier, every city kind of has their own way of doing things, and some cities allow for the medicals to be done in your country of residence before you go to China. So for instance, Shanghai and Beijing would allow for you to do your medical here in India. It helps to save time, but then you do need to get that translated into Chinese. So it's just something to consider. Otherwise, you can get to China and do your medical there. Once that's done, you need to get through your work permit application and your residence permit application. Right now in Shanghai, we see turnaround times of about 4 to 6 weeks to get through steps 4 and 5. Beijing is about 6 to 8 weeks. So you really cannot begin working, your foreign national cannot begin working until you've finished that last process, which is getting your residence permit application. So you really need to be careful about that to make sure that they're not working beforehand. So for China, the maximum stay that you could be granted on a work permit is 3 years. I just kind of reviewed the processing time. 10 to 12 kind of encompasses the entire process, but it's about 4 to 6 once you're in the country for Shanghai, 6 to 8 for Beijing. The benefit is that you can work at a client's site. As long as you have a commercial service agreement available and it shows the name of the client site, then that is a possibility as well. They do not require a labor market test, which is very helpful, saves a bit of time there. There is no quota, cap, or ratio of local workers to the foreign national workers. That applies to this process. And there's no seniority requirement, so you don't have to have somebody that's worked with your organization for a year or two before you send them. What's difficult about China, with many other countries as well, is the document requirements. So a lot of the documents need to be translated or legalized. You know, every document kind of has to be reviewed for what the requirements are. So for instance, a police clearance certificate is required for the application. Although if you're a Category A candidate, many cities don't require this. So that's where we go back to every city and every candidate kind of creates their own path depending on what they're doing and how they're getting there. The company needs to be registered with the expert bureau. So this is a corporate registration that must occur. It typically takes about 2 to 3 weeks. So that's step number 1 before you can even apply for a work permit. The degree needs to be legalized. Since China is not among one of the ones in the Hague Convention, the documents must be legalized for use. And as you probably are all aware, the legalization process varies by country. So you just need to plan accordingly because some places do take a considerable amount of time to get the legalizations. And then finally, we did talk about the medical exam. You know, that is certainly a requirement. The requirement around work permit extensions is that it must be submitted at least 30 working days before the expiration date. If you fail to comply with this deadline, your renewal will get denied, without a doubt. Once the extension is submitted, you cannot continue to work until the extension is granted. So you do need to be careful. The good news is that right now China's processing the extensions in just a couple of weeks. So as long as you're applying 30 days in advance, your foreign nationals should be okay. We like to encourage our clients to apply earlier than 30 days, like a couple months beforehand, just to ensure that there's no interruption to their work. Now, from a dependent visa perspective, the S1 is for family members who can apply and enter as a dependent. They would need to complete their temporary residence registration and then apply for a residence permit. In China, the spouses cannot work. If they want to work, they have to apply for their own work permit, but the children may study at the schools. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there is also the L visa, which is the tourist visa. This can be converted to a residence permit in China if needed, but for that, all of the civil documents must be legalized, such as the marriage certificate and the birth certificate. Like every country, China definitely has some compliance considerations. One of the most important ones is that the employee must work and live in the same city. That is a requirement for China. Expats must report their employment information to the local police department. You can't skip that step. And foreign nationals must provide their fingerprints and biometric data to the Public Security Bureau. That's part of their enhancements on knowing who the foreign nationals are. There are a number of different compliance considerations as well. You know, employers can be fined up to about $1,400 for every foreigner that they illegally employ, with a maximum fine of about $14,000. If you could be fined if you don't have a valid employment document in the country. Foreign nationals staying in China illegally can face fines, and then you know, on the extreme, there's the risk of deportation for those found in the country with illegal residence or work in the country. So you do need to be very aware that they're tracking it and they're auditing companies, and there's not only fines, but you certainly don't want to risk a deportation of one of your people. So as you can see, there are a lot of factors that go into assessing and determining the appropriate process for China. We take into account the desired location, the skill set, the education, in order to map out the appropriate process. So this is, if you're intending to send somebody to China, you definitely need to have a conversation with your immigration provider up front to identify what the appropriate course is based on the factors that we're taking into account. All right, I'd like to move into the next country, which is Japan. So Japan is another country that has a very open stance on immigration. It wasn't always like this, though. Japan's foreign national population is still small compared to other rich nations, but since Prime Minister Abe took on that leadership role in 2012, the number of foreign-born people working in Japan has steadily expanded. Japan is the third largest economy. Their economy is valued at essentially $5 trillion, and they have the largest electronic goods industry and patent filings. Japan is currently the world's oldest country and is set to get even older. The number of elderly people aged 65 or older accounts for about 27% of the 127 million people that live there. That's up nearly 4 percentage points from 5 years ago. In 2050, it's estimated by the government that 40% of Japan's population will be over the age of 65. Furthermore, Japan's rural population is expected to plunge 17% in only 12 years. This decline will steepen with the population falling by 2% per year in the year 2030. So Japan has leveraged immigration as a means of repopulating and bringing in talent. There were about 1.5 million foreign workers in Japan as of the end of October 2018, which was a 14% increase from the prior year. This is the highest figure in history for Japan. So they're definitely growing aggressively their foreign national population. The majority of long-term foreign residents in Japan acquire permanent residency rather than Japanese nationality. There are only about 1,000 new naturalizations each year compared to approximately 30,000 new PR visas that are issued. By industry, The bulk of the foreign nationals are working within the manufacturing realm, so it's nearly 30%, whereas about 16% are in the service industry. All of the remaining industries that are listed here represent about 13%. And this is where we see a lot of the immigration moving, is in supporting, the balance of all of these different industries. There are labor shortages there, and that's why the government has streamlined and opened up their borders. So as many of you probably know, the certificate of eligibility is the work permit title in Japan. Prior to applying for a work visa, an application for the COE, or Certificate of Eligibility, must be filed at the Immigration Bureau. Typically, the COE takes about 4 to 6 weeks to obtain. Now, your work permit options within the country are primarily focused into these areas. At least this is what we tend to see most often for our clients. The first one is the intercompany transferee. This is applicable to foreign nationals who have worked at the sending entity for at least 1 year prior to being transferred to Japan, and whose duties are of a professional nature. In this situation for the ICT, the payroll can be in either location, and the contract is with the home entity. The second column represents the business manager. This is applicable to investors who are opening a new business entity in Japan, or for senior executives who work in very high-level positions. In order to qualify for this one, you do need to have a minimum tenure of at least 3 years. The contract can be either with the home or host company, and payroll can be either location. And then finally, the third category is for the engineer or specialist in humanities. And for this, a university degree relevant to the job duties or at least 10 years of professional experience in the field is required. For this one, as you can see, there is no minimum tenure. So we tend, when we're evaluating cases for our clients, we're looking at that minimum tenure as a way to determine how we pivot, whether we send them on the ICT or whether we leverage the engineer specialist area. From a process standpoint, step number 1 is that we apply for the COE. This can be done while the candidate is at home. As I mentioned, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks. Once that's adjudicated and you get that approval, you then need to apply for your entry visa at the nearest consulate or the consulate of residence. Obviously, every consulate has different processing times, but we typically see it adjudicated within about a week. Then the foreign national can enter Japan, apply for the residence card, which is oftentimes issued at the airport. And then finally, you need to register with the local municipal office, and that needs to be carried out within 14 days of arrival. So it is important, one of the things that we always tell our clients is, once you get that visa and you travel to to Japan, make sure you let us know, because we need to coordinate the registration with the local office. You can't skip that step because it is a compliance issue. Now, in 2012, Japan introduced a points-based system for the highly skilled foreign professional. One of the benefits of this program is that they've expedited the permanent residency for these highly skilled professionals in the fields of management, research, and technical areas. Typically, in Japan, you apply for PR after living in Japan for 10 consecutive years. But if you qualify under this category, you can expedite that to 3 years if you achieve at least 70 points, or as little as 1 year if you achieve 80 points. Now, the points are calculated and accumulated based on things such as education level, age, salary. Those types of factors are all taken into account. It's a pretty large worksheet, and then you can calculate what your points are. The longest period of stay that's permitted on this highly skilled foreign professional permit is 5 years, and it may be extended. There's a lot of good benefits associated with this. There is no requirement for the employee to have been employed by the sending company for any minimum time. So if you have a brand-new person that's highly qualified, you may want to consider this path. The payroll can be any location. For these applications, the Ministry of Justice will adjudicate the case in 10 days of receipt, as opposed to the 4 to 6 weeks for the COE. So this is very fast. It's a fast-track process. A spouse of a highly skilled professional may engage in these activities even if she or he does not have the required academic background or work experience. So that's definitely a plus. And under the current system, parents of foreign nationals staying in Japan may also gain entrance into Japan. But the parents need to be either with the parent to take care of a child under the age of 7, or where the parent will take care of a pregnant, highly skilled foreign professional. So they do put a couple of qualifications on why parents are coming in. It is something to just keep in mind, though, because oftentimes we do get asked, can my parents come to the country as well? The annual salary for the highly skilled professional must not be less than 3 million JPY, which I calculated it yesterday is 27,730 US dollars. Higher points, however, will be awarded if your salary is above that amount on a sliding scale, and it also will depend on the age of the applicant. Now, cost of living adjustment allowances may be included if it's guaranteed. Expense reimbursements such as commuting allowances or dependent allowances and housing allowances, though, may not be included. Overtime pay may also not be included towards your salary calculations. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, payroll can be in any location, of course, subject to Japanese tax regulations, though. The renewal on a work permit should be filed at least 3 months prior to the expiration date. The COE itself does not need to be renewed, but the entry visa and residence card need to be renewed, but can be done indefinitely. Now, foreign nationals holding a residence card are required to notify the Immigration Bureau within 14 days of any change to their name, nationality, residence, or employer. Failure to notify the Immigration Bureau within 14 days of this type of a change may result in a fine of up to 200,000 JPY, which is about $2,000 USD. Similarly, providing false information to the Bureau may result in a jail term of up to 1 year or a fine of 200,000 JPY. So encourage your foreign nationals to update their information if there is a change. On the compliance end, there's also, of course, fines for encouraging or practicing any type of illegal employment. Foreign workers violating the status may be deported, barred from re-entering from up to 10 years, or fined up to 3 million JPY, which is about 28,000 US dollars. So you don't want to be in that type of a situation. All right, moving along. So now I would like to shift the conversation to what is called the Next 11. Just by a show of hands, has anyone in the room heard of the Next 11? Oh, okay. All right, good. So back in 2001, you've all heard of BRIC, right? Everybody knows what BRIC is. That was coined by a gentleman by the name of Jim O'Neill. He worked for Goldman Sachs. In 2005, he also coined a term called the Next 11. And the Next 11 represents the next stage of basically BRIC. It is for 11 countries. It is for 11 countries: Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia, Philippines, Iran, Vietnam, and Mexico. basically, the next 11 represents a colossal potential for economic progress. These countries all share the characteristics of rapidly growing populations combined with significant industrial capacity and/or potential. They have a growing consumer market with increased earning potential, and this obviously creates business opportunities for both local and international companies. So I'm not going to go through all 11, that would take quite a while, but I would like to go through a few or as many as I can in the amount of time that I have. The first one that I would like to talk about is South Korea. So South Korea is obviously a rich nation. Their GDP is at about $41,000 per capita. And the OECD average is just a little bit above that. So it's obviously a powerhouse of a country and a very wealthy nation. From an immigration standpoint, I would like to discuss 4 different options that are available to corporations. The C4, which is a short-term employment permit, the D7, which is an intercompany transfer, the D8, and then the E7, which is used for a local hire. So the C4 is a short-term work permit that allows certain business activities for up to 3 months. For instance, you can dispatch a foreign national to South Korea under a service contract, for instance, if they have to do some maintenance checking. The requirement here is that you need to submit the contract that demonstrates the name of the South Korean entity. You can also do work in e-business, IT, biotech, et cetera, in the technology area. Under this, the payroll needs to be in the home country. The visa is not renewable. It is issued as a single entry, and it must be applied for at the consulate. Typically, it's going to take about a week or so to get that. But this is a great option for you to consider if you need to send somebody to South Korea for a short period of time. If your company has a South Korean entity, whether it's a liaison office, a branch, or a subsidiary in Korea, there are basically 2 types of international transfer visas from an immigration perspective. It is important, though, for me to note that in order for a Korean entity to sponsor either a D7 or a D8, it cannot merely be a paper company or a shell company. You need to show a substantial presence in Korea, and in doing so, you're showing that you have operating funds, registered capital, corporate taxes that have been paid in Korea, local employees, a significant number of local employees, office space. That type of stuff is going to facilitate the process to demonstrate that you've got a presence in South Korea. So the D7 for the intercompany transfer is the appropriate category for transferees moving to a Korean branch or liaison office that's registered with the Korean government for an initial stay of between 1 and 2 years. It is renewable indefinitely. The assignee needs to be employed by the sending entity for at least 1 year. The assignee needs to be a managerial or a skilled technical worker. Generally, you need to have at least a 4-year college degree, unless the candidate has a lot of relevant work experience. The employment contract must be with the home entity, and payroll can be in either of the locations. Now, while there is no quota prescribed, the Korean government is going to look at how many local employees you have. If there's not a lot, you're going to be limited in how many D7 people you can bring over. And of course, the companies must be linked by common ownership because it is an intercompany transfer. Now, the D8 visa, which is in the second column, really is more of an investment visa. Our clients don't use it as much as the D7. The D7 is definitely the most popular, Because for the D8, the beauty of the D8 is that you don't have to have any tenure with the company. So that's a nice benefit. But on the opposite side, you do need to demonstrate that you're making an investment in the South Korea. In fact, the investment is about $86,000 for each D8 visa holder that you want to send there. So this may not be as attractive of an option. The D7 tends to be what most clients use. You just need to make sure that they have the 1-year minimum tenure in your organization. So from a process standpoint, the first step is to apply for the D7 Visa Issuance Confirmation Number. It's a mouthful, so they call it VICN. This is filed at an immigration office in Korea, and it typically takes about 7 to 10 business days from the application date to get the adjudication. That would then be sent to the foreign national, and at that point, the candidate needs to apply for the visa at the local consulate. Typically, the VICN is issued to confirm a period of stay under the D7 visa from 6 months to up to 1 to 2 years. It depends on the contract that you have in place. After the D7 is issued, obviously, the candidate can then travel to Korea and enter into the country. At that point, they need to apply for the alien registration card, which would take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. And then they would apply for the issuance of the interim certificate. So there are a few steps that have to take place once they're in South Korea under the D7 or the D8. The other visa that I want to talk about is the E7 visa, and this is for local hire. So this is going to be used if you want to send the foreign nationals to South Korea as a local hire. In other words, the payroll and the contract would be with the South Korean entity. The job description for the E7 must match one of the 83 categories of occupations that are listed by the Immigration Department in South Korea. So they have a list of professions that you basically need to match your candidate up to. They are executive, business management, types of positions, but I did take a look at the list, and like software development is on there, mechanical engineer is on there, web developer is on there. So most likely the types of positions that you have would most likely be on that list. So it is something to consider. Now, the sponsoring company must be fully established and registered with the commercial registry, tax office, and designated foreign exchange bank in order to do this. And only a Korean company with 5 or more Korean employees can sponsor the E7 visa. It is subject to a quota where the number of foreign nationals cannot exceed 20% of the total number of Korean employees. And generally, this visa takes about 2 to 3 weeks to process. All right, so the next, from the next 11, the country that I would like to discuss is Vietnam. Excuse me, I just want some water. So in contrast to South Korea, Vietnam has a GDP of about $6,900. If you recall, South Korea was at about $40,000. Quite a big difference in terms of GDP. So a work permit for Vietnam is classified as either one for a manager, but their definition of manager is probably very different than what we would define manager to be. It's a little bit more narrow in its definition, and it's for someone who's entitled to enter into commercial transactions on behalf of the company according to the company charter. So there's probably not too many people that would be qualified to apply for a manager for Vietnam. The second area would be a specialist or an expert, and this is somebody that holds a university degree and has at least 5 years of experience. So this is probably the category that would most apply to your constituents. The third one would be the technical worker. This is somebody that has been trained for at least 1 year in a technical field and has at least 3 years of experience in that technical area. So for the work permits in Vietnam, you need to show that the person has at least 1 year of tenure with your organization before you're sending them there. The work permits are issued for a maximum duration initially of 2 years, and it is a requirement that they also obtain a medical. Only the assignee needs to get the medical, no dependents need to go through a medical. And in fact, it is possible for your assignee to get the medical in their home country if they want to try to save time. If you are sending somebody to fulfill a service contract between the sending entity and the client, the minimum tenure is 2 years. So you do need to take that into account. If they're going to your own operation there, 1 year is sufficient. If they're going to a client site, we need to see 2 years of minimum tenure. One of the requirements in Vietnam is that an employer files an annual report of demand. This is filed every year, and it seeks approval for using foreigners for each specific position where Vietnamese nationals cannot meet the employer's requirements. It takes about 30 days to get through that adjudication process, and you must do it before any work permits can be filed. So that's step number one. You also need to make sure that there's a commitment to training the local labor market. The Vietnamese government is keen to see that foreign investment is committed to upscaling their Vietnamese labor market. So that must be a component. And this is not unique. We see that in many other countries. Brazil, for instance, has the same requirement for their short-term work permit, the technical visa. If the candidate needs to depart early, there is a departure requirement. The foreign national must surrender and cancel their temporary residence card prior to leaving the country, and the sponsoring entity must also return the original work permit in case of an early termination. And finally, there is a quarterly reporting requirement. So the employers hosting foreign nationals must submit a quarterly report. It's due before the 5th day of every month to the Labor Department, and it basically gives them a status overview of all the foreign nationals that are working within the organization. The work permit process for a foreign national, whether it's either one of those 3 categories that I talked about, the manager, the technical, or the specialist, it is document intensive, and it requires police clearances, translations, and legalizations. I only bring this up because I know how time sensitive your assignments are, so you do need to think about that if you are interested in sending people to Vietnam. There is a lot of that pre-work on the documents that need to take place. The employment contract must remain with the home entity for Vietnam, so please keep that in mind. And the application must be sponsored by the entity in Vietnam. If the home entity has no entity of its own in Vietnam, the host entity can be either a client or a contractor or a supplier. Just to briefly give you an overview of the process, from a high level, step 1 is to do a visa pre-approval application. So the host entity in Vietnam must apply to the Immigration Department in Vietnam for a visa pre-approval letter for the foreign national and any dependents that are needed to travel. On the issuance, the visa approval letter will be faxed directly to the Vietnamese consulate in the country of the applicant's residence. Step 2 is the visa endorsement and collection. So the applicant must collect the business visa and any dependent visas at the consulate. The processing time, of course, will vary based on the consulate, and the entry visa is typically issued for a validity of 3 months. The candidate and his or her family can then travel to Vietnam with their entry visas, and then within 24 hours of arrival, they need to register their residence. As with other countries, if they're staying at a hotel, this is typically coordinated through the hotel. They then need to do the medical, so a medical certificate is required for the principal applicant and should be done at a clinic in Vietnam or, as I mentioned earlier, even overseas, as long as it's recognized by the Labor Department if it is at an overseas location. The next step is to file for the local police clearance certificate application. So the Labor Departments require a local police clearance certificate instead of a foreign police certificate when arriving into Vietnam. And this process can take up to 20 days, 20 working days. So that's a little bit of a time-consuming part in the process. Step 7 and Step 8 are basically your work permit application and your temporary residence card. So this is where you're submitting everything to the Labor Department, and the processing time here is, do I have it on here? Yeah, about a week for the work permit application and up to a couple of weeks for the final step, the residence application. So with that, I know that Jake wanted to do some testing. Make sure that you guys were all paying attention.
Yeah. Hey, Carmen, that was really great. Thank you very much for all that information. So,
Oh, you're welcome.
one of the things I really like about Carmen and her team is they make so many complicated things into something that seems somewhat simple, you know, that you can...
Thank you.
They present so many of the complex processes with these kinds of diagrams and things that make it very easy to understand and follow. So, to the Kahoot, friends. We want to test your knowledge of Carmen's presentation. And let's just make sure that I've got it ready for you. Ooh. Just a second. While you're getting Kahoot, this is your chance to open it, because if you win, there is a reward, right, Kasum? Yes. Actually, the top 3 winners. Will be there. Hey, just a sec. I'm trying to figure out why it's not working.